Hey guys, it's vf.miniatures Warhammer Tactics series. So, if you've been in 40K for quite some time, you've probably heard about Warhammer tournaments and maybe even thought of going to one. And in this video I'm going to tell you all about these events and we'll figure out if that's something for you. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Firstly, what's a 40K tournament exactly? Well, it's an organized series of games between a number of players supervised by a tournament organizer. Basically a person that makes sure that everyone is following the rules and helps to solve some difficulties if two persons have an argument about something in the game, which happens quite often, as you can imagine, in such stressful circumstances. And obviously these events can consist of any number of players, from a couple of guys playing with each other to hundreds of people on some super major grand tournaments. And almost always there is some system to gauge the player's performance to make sure that they are put up against a more proficient opponent round after round, at least in theory. And this means that the player who won the tournament must have gone through some fierce resistance and probably encountered the best of what the tournament had to offer. Again, theoretically. In practice, there are things like matchups where one army can be very, very good against some opponents, and if that person who operates that army is lucky enough, they may have encountered only those opponents on their way, meaning that they have less resistance for their army on their way and placed better than, for example, a person who encountered opponents that are less handy to them. Tournaments always have some sort of guidelines or rules pack that is used in conjunction with the Grand Tournament mission pack that Games Workshop produces for us. And these rules, they regulate everything from penalties for acting indecently or stuff like when the rounds start and when the rounds finish, the prizes, everything like that. Also, there are sometimes FAQs that come out for these specific tournaments which rule out how some strange rules that the Games Workshop haven't spoken out about yet, how they will operate on these tournaments. So whenever you're planning to go to a tournament, make sure to check out the rules set, because there may be something that you don't expect to see or to encounter. And why would you want to go to a tournament? Well, there are three big reasons why I recommend everyone to eventually decide and go to a 40K tournament. First of all, this is a unique experience of playing the game we all love with different people. There are all kinds of armies you'll encounter, all kinds of opponents with different styles, different attitudes, different table setups, different terrain setups, everything that you won't find in your garage or your local club, most likely. Because of course, if you play the same guys over and over again with the same armies, it may get dull eventually, even if you change up the missions and the models that you play with. You get used to all the old tricks, you know each other armies very well, and there's nothing probably that can surprise you. Like playing against some unique army that you have not seen yet in your life on the table in front of you. Obviously, this may be stressful a bit because you don't know the rules, but that's why you have some time before the game to ask the opponent some basic questions about their army. And you can watch my video Top 10 Tips for 40K Noobs to learn more about that. Next reason, you get a whole bunch of practice. Tournaments teach you how to play the game like nothing else does. You'll be forced to do your best in stressful conditions, and that's the perfect way to become a better player. I remember going to my first tournaments, and I'll admit it was pretty scary, and I thought that everything will be terrible and I'll make a whole bunch of mistakes. And of course I made some mistakes, but it wasn't that terrible after all. And the moment when I really felt that I now understand how 40K works and how all the rules operate came right when I was playing and going to the tournaments. Before that, I wasn't sure in some things and some rules didn't make sense to me. So yeah, tournaments are extremely helpful for your 40K skill. For those of you who don't consider yourself to be beginners, I'd again encourage you to go to tournaments, because that's where you'll learn some advanced techniques, probably on the receiving ends of some pro players' tactics, but anyways, you will learn and copy some of that and use it against your opponents after that in the future. And the last but definitely not least reason to go to tournaments are the new exciting acquaintances. Believe it or not, but throwing dice and moving minis on the board makes for some incredible friendships, especially when you banter about something terrible that happened with your force and you're really mad at your opponent, but you kind of like what is happening because you know that maybe in the next turn you'll have a chance to do the same thing to their force. And with these new 40k people in your life, you'll be able to refine new rosters for the upcoming events and play some more games at home and maybe your local club. Also, you have someone to exchange bits. Maybe this person collects another type of Space Marines and you'll be able to give them your useful bits and they will give you theirs instead. Also, it helps to have someone to share a box set with, for example, Indomitus box set, and your opponent collects Necrons and you collect Space Marines and you divide the price and share the parts, which is something that can make collecting Warhammer much more economically efficient. There are, however, things that I must warn you about before you go to your first tournament. All players, like all people, are different, and it means that there are some guys that are much less pleasant to interact with than others. There are even sometimes players that you would dream not to encounter ever again in your life, in games, in tournaments, or in general. So be prepared for that. Just roll through these games because you can't choose your opponents. That's the point of the tournament. You must play with whoever the tournament decides that you need to play against, and just ignore the things that this person may be bestowing upon you and just don't let it spoil the fun for you. Be patient, be polite, and concentrate on the game. That's my advice if you encounter someone like that. Because in general, the people in Warhammer community are very nice, very friendly, and you will probably only encounter like one or two guys like that in your entire Warhammer career, depending on how lucky, quote-unquote, you are. Next thing, tournaments aren't meant for complete novices. If you've seen my video how to start playing 40k, my recommendation there was and still stands to play at least 10 games before going to your first novice tournament, because that's the amount of time you need to spend playing the 40k to understand most of the rules. Of course, there will be some things that you don't understand, but those can be learned in the process. I remember playing one of my first tournaments, and there was a guy there who was asking a question literally every phase of the game on how this phase operates. So it was really clear that they did not follow this 10-game rule, and probably it's one of their first games of 40k, or they have not played this edition of the game yet at all. And the next thing, some people somehow don't know this, but there are tournaments for novices only, tournaments that ban all the players with high ratings, and those players cannot go to those tournaments because they are considered to be too powerful of opponents, which will not be beneficial for the people who are just starting out, like maybe yourself. These events are perfect for people who are just starting out because you will be able to learn on roughly the same level with the person in front of you, and the tournament organizer will be like your mini teacher telling you how the game really works when you don't understand it and your opponent can't help you. Here is a layout of a typical tournament. First comes the registration. It's when you come to the building where the tournament is going to take place. You notify the tournament organizer that you've come, you pay the entry fee if you didn't pay it online already, you set all your models on a tray with all the accessories, your dice, your tape measure, everything that you need to play the games, and get ready to go to the designated table for your first battle. If you've come early, I recommend to take some time to look at your army and imagine how you would use it against your potential opponent. Of course, you may not know who are you up against, but in most cases you don't need that information to know at least the basic tactics of how your army operates. Of course, that's something you should have probably thought about before coming to the tournament, but it's the perfect moment to renew that information in your head. Sometimes you already know who are you up against, and in these cases I recommend strongly to take a look at their codex, think about the stratagems they may use against you, which of those stratagems are most dangerous to you, look at their units, how their list looks, how it probably operates, what are the key points, which points you need or you should probably attack first, and what will your opponent target in your force first. Then come the games. Hopefully I don't need to explain how those work. If you don't know that, probably you need to watch some of my other videos. After each game, there's usually a small break that is very critical for your success in all tournaments, because that's the moment when you need to let your brain relax. Because it's very easy to get burnt out if you're playing a long tournament with a lot of games, like 3 games in a day. And after the first one you may be tired, after the second one you'll probably be exhausted, and after the third one you will feel like you're dead. And you can combat that at least partially if you let yourself rest and recuperate after each game. Stretch your legs and back, eat and drink something, especially something sweet, because it helps your brain to work. And after all the games are finished, there are announcements of the result and the award ceremony for those lucky winners who are getting their trophies. And remember to always check your models for missing bits and check how many dice you have and how many dice you had before the tournament started, because I cannot tell you how many times I have heard of guys missing some parts of their models and they only found out that something is missing when they got home and opened up the case like a week after the tournament. And obviously it was very hard for the tournament organizer to help them find what they are looking for, because so much time has passed already. So if you can't find something, first try looking for it yourself as much as you can, and then notify the TO as soon as possible, because they may be able to help you, and notify other people that you are trying to find some model, some bit or something like that. And now the final piece of advice, here is what you need to have for your first tournament. This may look obvious, but believe me, some of the more experienced players have forgot to bring some of these things to a tournament, and it happens all the time. So you need some dice, those that you will play with. Take the dice that are highly visible, because it will be easier for you to see the results, and from the standpoint of an opponent, it's much easier to control your rolls this way. I really don't like when someone is playing with me with some very randomly assorted dice that are very, very difficult to see what's actually there on the roll. That's why I always ask my opponent to, if they have the other set of dice, to use those that are more visible, which is also something that you can ask them if you feel like you can't control what they are doing with the dice. Next up, you need more dice, because you will need to indicate lost wounds on models and deployment borders when you are actually deploying, to figure out how far you can deploy and not get beyond that point. That's very important. Don't use your dice that you play with to indicate lost wounds. I cannot tell you how many times I've had this situation with my opponents, when they have rolled something near a model that is wounded or was wounded, and now we're trying to figure out, did this model have 3 lost wounds or 5 lost wounds? And obviously I feel like it lost 5 wounds and they feel like the model lost 3, and we don't really remember, and it's very hard to figure out. So just to get rid of that problem, never use the same dice for the wounds and for rolling. Bring a tape measure, because it's the holy grail of 40k. Without it, you aren't a true 40k player, period. And obviously you need to measure distances, you need to measure charges, something like that. All those things are very important, and you don't want to borrow the tape measure from your opponent every time you need to check some distances. Next is an army transport case. Of course, you can transport your models in a shoebox with some cotton wool or something like that, but I don't recommend that because cotton wool leaves fibers on your painted models. That's something that you should consider. And also the shoebox can be really closed, so you will most likely turn it around and your models will fall out and break. So use a special case for the models. It does not cost a lot of money, but it will keep your models safe for a long time. Again, snack and water, as I already said, you need to have something to feed your brain and you will be there for a long time. Not all tournaments have a cafeteria somewhere you can eat nearby. And your rules, usually your codex/supplements. A lot of tournament organizers require you to have a written copy of rules with you at all times. Check the tournament's guidelines not to get in trouble. So let's recap. I recommend to go to the tournaments because they are very fun and they are a unique way to enjoy 40k, and to be honest, you are not playing 40k to its fullest if you have never tried going to a tournament. So be prepared to face some resistance there, maybe some less than pleasant people, and learn the rules. And once you have played at least 10 games of 40k, go to a novice tournament. You will most likely enjoy it. So if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.